let's round the corner into our football section. We've got a bit of Wellington Phoenix. Winning Wellington Phoenix weekend. The Blokes had a good win. They snuffed out the niggly Newcastle Jets challenge, and the Wellington Phoenix men are top of the table, as they are every week at the moment. 8 wins, 4 draws, 2 losses. Next best team, Melbourne Victory, they've only got 6 wins, so bugger them. Mariners and Wanderers, they've got 7 wins, so credit to them. The women, they had a win over Canberra United, which propels Canberra United to last in the A-League. Wellington Phoenix women go up to 7th. They are 6 wins, 1 draw, and 7 losses. As we know, many of those wins in Aotearoa, many of those losses in Australia. I was reminded how awesome Porirua Park is. I imagine they can get, Wellington Phoenix men, they can draw a bigger crowd at the Cake Tin. So you probably, no matter the fact that you've got to shut down half the stadium, you can still probably get more people into that stadium than you would for Porirua Park. But as far as building an atmosphere, generating a vibe, bit of mana for the Phoenix, I was tempted Porirua Pa. Sounds like a pretty cool one, but might need to put that on the hoist and come up with a better kind of fortress name, because it does feel like a fortress down in Porirua. But I kind of might want to see the men play there as well, maybe a double header at Porirua Park. That would be bonkers, I would suggest. You can maybe weave between the Wellington Phoenix and some of the Australians in the A-League, because you did say that you want to talk about the Australians, the Kiwis in the A-League. Who cares about the Aussies? We don't care about the Aussies. And I do think the Canberra United team, who lost to the Wellington Phoenix women, they've got a couple Kiwis in there, am I correct?
Yep, Devon Jackson was a relatively prominent part. She's really she started off the season playing off the bench here or there, getting bigger and bigger minutes. It's just progress on top of progress on top of progress. And now she's just the regular starter for them. She had a goal disallowed at one point, I think, in that game. And then Ruby Nathan also played off the bench, which is more in line with what she's been doing this season as well. So it's good solid step ups there from a couple of players who dominated the National League in 2022. So you do that in 2022, 2023, you're playing A-League football. That's the new pathway. But yeah, they've been going all right for a team that admittedly has not been going so all right. Where are we? We're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 different Kiwis have played women's A-League for Aussie clubs this season, plus Georgia Candy has been an injury replacement lately. 2 of those players have since left. So there's 9 current Kiwis at Aussie teams, because where are we? Millie Clegg obviously has left Western Sydney to go play for Racing at Louisville, and Rebecca Burrows sneakily left Newcastle Jets in order to play for a team in the Chinese Super League. So there you go. Men's side, Dane Ingham, Newcastle Jets. He played against the Phoenix on the weekend. He was one of the Jets' better players. He's been he had a real breakout season last year. They named him Player of the Season for the Jets, which was wild because he was a fullback for a team that conceded one of the highest rates per game, and then moved to play as more of an attacking player and had no goals and 1 assist. And apparently that's good enough for Player of the Season for Newcastle Jets last year. But that does disguise what was definitely his best season, his most prominent. He's getting regular starts, and he's built off that this season. He's continuing to look pretty solid. He's swinging in really nice crosses. He does have a couple of assists this season as well. Played as more as a defender against the Phoenix on the weekend. You also got Storm Rue at Central Coast Mariners, who are maybe the form team in the A-League. I mean, it's a sneaky one to say when the Phoenix is sitting top and keep answering every step up that comes across them. They keep having a response to that. But Central Coast, as defending champs, lost their first 4 games. and can't remember what they did on the weekend, but I think they won again, which means I think that's 10 games undefeated since then. So they're on a big streak of like resurgent form. And Storm Roo was a big part of that until he got sent off a couple of weeks ago. So he's currently out suspended. Ollie Sale got recalled by Perth Glory. The other guy who was starting instead of him after Sale got dropped after just 2 weeks, the other guy comes in, keeps a clean sheet in his first game, doesn't keep another clean sheet for like 2 months after that, and then has a spell where they concede 10 goals in 3 games. And now Ollie Sale's back in, made the last 2 starts. However, at the same time, Clayton Lewis seems to have dropped to the bench for MacArthur. So that's I'm writing an article on this. I'll go like more detail on all this, but that's the breeze through of how those Kiwis in the A-League. Obviously, there's a couple of young guys as well that might get a mention that aren't really regulars. As to the women's things more specifically, Rebecca Stott and Hannah Wilkinson at Melbourne City lost again on the weekend. A little bit of a bumpy form for them, but they are still the clear top team, best team. And those Stott's captain, Wilkinson, I think did score on the weekend, or was it last week? But she's chipping away. You know, they're starting every game. Liz Anton, Grace Jarley, they're playing every game for Perth. But Perth started badly. No, started quite well, and then have wobbled a bit more recently as well. And feels like that's coincided with Jarley being asked to play more as a winger and less of a striker. Although Liz Anton is doing nice things, really starting to make the left back spot her own there, having had a couple of years playing centre back for them. Burrows is left, Cleek's left, Hannah Blake and Rosetta Taylor. Rosetta Taylor doesn't really play for Adelaide at the moment, but Hannah Blake does. And Adelaide did have a win on the weekend, so they're off bottom. But Adelaide have struggled, and that's part of why Blake had such a brilliant first game of the season and hasn't quite been able to carry that on because the team's not very good. Mentioned Nathan and Jackson, and Georgia Candy's an injury replacement goalie for Melbourne Victory. So there's your breeze through of the Kiwis at Aussie A-League clubs. Pretty good stocks this year. Like if there's players who aren't playing as much as they would like, but in terms of numbers, definitely a record for women playing there. Not a record for men, but there's a few guys spread out at a couple of those clubs doing nice things. Most of them fullbacks.
We are from Aotearoa, we do breed a we love a football defender in Aotearoa.
We do. That and goalkeepers.
Yeah, no shortage of goalkeepers, which we are discussing most weeks on our Flying Kiwi section in the subscriber podcast. I did love that Oscar Zavara clip. I am the best striker in the league. That was pretty epic, and if he says it and then he scores a goal, I'd double down on him being the best striker in the league. And that is relevant because my question to you after Wellington Phoenix grabbed 2 wins, because on the men's side, you can say like the answer will be Oscar Zavara. He's back in the team, he scores goal. On the women's side, you'll say they're back at home. When they're at home, they win. My question is like, what did the Wellington Phoenix teams do well this weekend? They both had wins. So in wins, what do they do well? What are some signature elements of when they are winning? They do these things or they do this thing well, which was most evident in their displays over the weekend. Again, don't say Zavada. He's the best striker in the league. He made his comeback. Cool. I want an alternative answer there, and I want an alternative answer to the Wellington Phoenix, they were playing at home. The women were playing at home, sorry. Because, like, I can see how all Wellington Phoenix matters can be simplified to those elements. The men have Zavada in their team. They're going to score goals. They're probably going to win games. The women are back in New Zealand playing at Porirua Park. They're probably going to win. That's just what happens. But as far as, like, tactics, playing style, key performers, what did the Wellington Phoenix men and women do well over the weekend?
Well, to be fair, Oscar Zavada did say the best striker in the league quote. That was before he got injured, so that was before Costa Barbarosas had his big resurgence, right? So he said that before Costa came out and scored 6 goals in this and had an assist in the space of 4 games and whatever it was. So maybe he might want to as first equal. I don't know, unless you just want to classify Costa now as a winger more so when Zavada's available. So you can get picky with that if you want. But I I don't disagree with him. I certainly don't. Um, Sneaky Ben Old assist on that one as well. I want to make mention of that because starting to see Ben Old and a little bit of Oscar Van Hattem as well. Actually, these two guys who have Old more so, but had a few opportunities, been around the team for a couple years. And if there was one criticism of Old, there's probably a couple more criticisms of Van Hattem for just being a little bit less involved, but he was also getting fewer minutes. He's getting more involved. He's doing some things when he's out there. Ben Old is getting big opportunities and doing fantastic things when he's out there. Just that final contribution is the key thing. It's like it's one thing to look good, it's another thing to produce, get that production, the goals, the assists. Ben Old is in particular starting to do that, although I think Van Hattem's got a couple of assists as well. So shout out to a couple of them youngsters who are stepping up. When you consider this as a team whose attacking group was weakened from, well, the whole squad across the thing was weakened from last year to this year, and they needed those academy players to step up and do big things. Obviously, Paulson, Sermon, Lucas Kelly-Hill goes without saying the strides they've made this season and how important they've been towards what the team's doing. But Ben Old as well in particular now is looking fantastic. He's just also beyond all these other things I could say about him. He's just fun to watch. Like he's just one of those players who you're like, oh, Ben Old's playing. I'm gonna sit up and pay attention whenever the ball's at his feet. Because he just does stuff. He's such a good dribbler and he's got great close control and he's starting to thread these passes and pop up in the penalty area and stuff as well. It's great. It's good fun. Specifically to the question, I think there is one thing that links both the women and the men's performances this week together in a way that also might tell you a bit about what they've been doing before that, because I think it's been consistent for the men and that's why they're top of the table. I don't think it's quite been as consistent for the women, more specifically in those away games, which is probably why they're losing those away games 1-0, 2-1 every time, is just the defensive grit that you saw from both of them. And in different ways, because the Phoenix men, they switched formations. They started with the back three. They haven't done that this season. They've finished with the back three a few times, I'm pretty sure. Certainly, it was something they used to do a lot under Ufuk Talay, is sub on an extra defender and sit back when you're holding on to a lead, just for the last, 10, 20 minutes, or perhaps when you're, depending on the matchup. They played Newcastle Jets once before the season, and it was at home, and they lost 3-0. And they actually played quite well in the attacking areas, but they missed a few chances. But it's the way in which they gave up chances defensively and then how that flipped things around and defined the game. They clearly had a plan. they switched things up to that back three. You also had Nico Pennington playing at wing back on the right, filling in for Tim Payne, who was obviously suspended. And it was just like I thought Scott Wooden had his best game of the season in that one, and there's some decent challenges for that title as well from some of his performances, and just the way in which they do this every week. The Knicks blokes, they absorb pressure, but when I say they absorb pressure, I don't mean that in a cliche. They're just under pressure. I mean no, they literally absorb it. It's like a sponge picks up the water, and the water's not there anymore. It's in the sponge. Like they absorb the pressure. And they sit there defending their penalty area for large stretches sometimes, as we've seen in the last 2 weeks. They did it against Melbourne Victory. They did it against Newcastle Jets here, where it's not a great matchup for them. They're getting stretched. They're having to double up in those wide areas, but they sit there defending the penalty area and don't actually. You realize after a while, like you're sitting there watching this stuff, being stressed and like, it would be nice if we're up the other end and commanding things a bit more. But obviously football doesn't work like that. You got to have these periods where you need to be able to show the steel, and then at the end of it you stop and think, well, how many chances did the other team actually have? And let alone chances, like how many good chances, how many clear, like how many great saves did Alex Paulson have to make this week, kind of thing. And that's a higher bar than it is for most goalkeepers, because he makes great saves a lot more comfortably than other goalkeepers. But they have this way of like absorbing the pressure, but without, they bend but they don't break. Like they can just stop the other team from being able to create the chances they should be creating for the territory that they have. Do you want to say something?
I'm tapping into my okay, what is good death bowling bit from before.
Okay.
So like when you say absorb pressure, like what does that actually look like on the football field? Because when I watch the Wellington Phoenix men play, well, actually, to be honest, it starts with the goalies, and I think I'm still doubling down on Brianna Edwards being a really good goalie, better than. Well, it was actually wait. Let me get uh, Riley Foster.
Yeah. There you
She
go.
is the American,
Canadian.
the Canadian.
North American.
Who's the other Riley? Is there another Riley, another Foster in the goalkeeping?
Well, there's Michaela Foster, left back.
But so is it Riley Foster then Brianna Edwards? They're not, there's a goalie who's out
Yeah.
injured, right?
No.
So what?
That's number one and number two. They also
Yeah.
have
Okay.
Amy Daniele, who's the academy keeper, who's like their third choice, but
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
not really in the same
So yeah,
picture.
Brianna Edwards, she's better than Riley Foster. I'm doubling down on that. Brianna Edwards is awesome. She's the best Phoenix goalie there is in the women's side. We know all about Alex Paulson, right? Like he is an absolute beast. So when we're saying, because I imagine, sorry for interrupting, but I imagine that you're saying the women also absorb pressure really well in a gritty defense. Well, they have a good goalie. Like the men have a good goalie. So that's a factor, having a good goalie. But when I watch the Wellington Phoenix men play and hear you talking about absorbing pressure, there's always bodies around the ball. There's always bodies in front of the ball. So even if you do get a shot off, the Phoenix block shots must be through the roof, I'd imagine.
I suspect so. Yeah.
And it's like you can kind of see the similarities when you're like, okay, Scott Wooden's awesome, but then Rebecca Lake's awesome, Mackenzie Barry's awesome. Like there's these center defenders who are either always around the ball or always between the ball and the goal, which is, to me, that's one thing about absorbing pressure. Are there any other kind of just like football things that you can imagine in your mind when you're saying absorbing pressure?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good clarification. I think generally the most simplistic way to say it is that the pressure just comes from territory, probably. It's like the areas where you're in a position where the other team could shoot if they wanted, like within shooting range kind of thing. And just the moments in which you're actively being in defensive mode. And that, yeah, generally I'd say that just comes from the other team having the ball in a sort of within shooting range, and how that's sort of combated, how that's the absorption process of the matter is, yeah, block shots, keeper making saves, attacking players getting back behind the ball in order to crowd things out. It's maintaining your shape. It's winning headers when the ball is crossed into the penalty areas, having a goalkeeper who can come out and punch the ball, and both those teams do. And Brianna Edwards, I think everyone remembers the penalty save. She comes on, saves a penalty straight away. Yeah, good week for the Edwards over Foster argument when Foster, admittedly a dodgy red card, but like there's a reason also they didn't overturn the suspension. She does stick her elbow into her. It's not a hard elbow. It shouldn't really have been anything other than a telling off, but it wasn't going to be overturned. But yeah, I mean, to clarify my position on that, I think Riley Foster gives a lot of like sort of leadership aspects, professional experience. I think she's a more tidy all-round goalkeeper, but she's also like 5 years older, and that you expect that. And I love how they did that, where Edwards was the starting goalkeeper last year. She's pretty good, but they're not like, okay, you were pretty good, we're going to stick with that. They're like, no, we're going to bring in someone even better and challenge you even more. And I think she's been a better goalkeeper this year than she was last year as well for that experience. And I think Foster's the number one, but I also, when she's not been available in a couple games before and won't be available next game, I have no issues when Brie Edwards steps up and takes over. Like, it's not a thing I worry about. I did worry about what it would look like when Mackenzie Barry wasn't available this week, but that didn't seem to matter either. Chana Jaber, I think Piney was calling her on the thing. The Australian player that they've picked up mid-season, came in, did a solid job. I thought Rebecca Lake, fantastic. Again, she's been brilliant for the last sort of month in particular, but since she's taken over for Marissa Vandermeer. And same thing. Like they were doing the things the blokes have been doing for a few weeks. It's like keeper makes a few good saves, comes out and punches the ball. Edwards did that really well, a couple in particular, including one straight after the penalty. I think like they made a couple defensive subs. I think they did slip into a back five as well. So there was a crossover with that, but there was a steeliness, a kind of just that a sponginess to keep the absorption idea going on. There's a sponginess to the Phoenix women's defense, which I don't think was quite there for 90 full minutes in those away games. And that's one of those little things that hasn't quite. But then you also see the way in which their attack built in confidence when they started to get a few passing moves going in the first half. I think Macy Fraser and I can't remember who the other one was, but there was like a specific move where I felt like it feels like something clicked there. It feels like there was a bit of the smiles were coming back and they're realizing they can work a few things, and they did got a couple goals, but it's the way they defended with 10 women in the last 20 odd minutes that really defined how that game should be remembered. And it was the same thing that the Phoenix Blokes did for a while, although they did actually concede a goal at one point, but then Zavada scored straight away afterwards. And it's that, that's the pattern that we've seen from the men quite a lot. It's a pattern that we've only seen in stages and flashes from the women, but we got a big extended example of that on the weekend, despite the fact that Paul Temple as well, with like 5 minutes of stoppage time, I think it was a stoppage time subs, chucks on Ellen McMillan, chucks on Daisy Brazendale, two academy, admittedly defensive-minded players, but from the academy debutantes. Just chuck a couple debutantes on while we're hanging on for this lead. No dramas, then they get the job done the same as everyone else does.
I think it's more notable for the women to have that defensive grit. Obviously, the home away, the losses is all a factor, but also if you've got defensive grit while you also have Zoe McMeekin going everywhere.
Yeah.
it's pretty difficult to, really execute your defensive system, your efforts, your mana with Zoe McMeekin popping up everywhere, bursting forward as she does. Whereas the Wellington Phoenix men, I can understand how it's easier for them to be more organized defensively when they don't necessarily have a player like Zoe McMeekin. What position did she start in for the game against Canberra?
Left back, but you'll also see her at right wing on the exact opposite part of the field.
Like the Wellington Phoenix men, Costa's going to burst forward, Zavada's a out-and-out striker, Ben Old's going to be bursting forward to set up chances, but, they kind of stay in their little silo, their little bubble.
You're not going to see Lucas Kelly-Hield swapping places with Oscar Zavada at any point.
That's literally the comparison. Like, because they're both tall, they're both athletic left backs. One of them stays at left back, the other goes everywhere. So that's a difference in their defensive systems. So that's how the women are doing it, and that's an impressive element of the women's team defensive grit is they have that defensive grit, and they also have some of the funkiest attacking talents we've seen in Macy Fraser, Zoe McMeekin, and so on. The men, the way you're describing that absorbing pressure, because I'm building this image in my head, and I've just got like Phoenix, 11 men behind the ball, opposition's got the ball basically in the Phoenix third. And nothing happens. Yeah. It's just like Phoenix win the ball eventually.
And what was a theme that we talked about the Phoenix from the start, which I don't think we've seen as much in the last few weeks, but a theme certainly through the beginning of the season, and which will continue to be so for the rest of the season. They're counterattacking, right? So you sit all these players behind the ball, you win the ball, you spring into attack. That's not just like you're in defensive mode, but they can transition between those quite quickly. It's not like saying we're in defensive mode and we're staying in defensive mode. The bus is parked and we throw away the keys. That can be a platform for them launching into attack as well, as they've done quite well this season.
Yeah. But then I'm thinking, okay, this Warriors comparison that we've been building out over the past kind of 6 months. What are my visions of Warriors last season in a season where they were really good defensively? Was just a lot of effort kind of deep in your own territory with Shans Nickel-Clockstar making try-saving tackles all across the try line. You know, it's blokes chasing from the middle to make a tackle on the sideline on your try line, because it's the same thing. Absorbing pressure in rugby league, can you defend your try line? Can you defend plays in your 20-meter zone? That is absorbing pressure, because you can kind of let the opposition build up a head of steam, get down the other end, and then their attack fizzles out because there's no because the defensive team, that's their focus, is defending the 20-meter zone. I think it's the same thing with the Wellington Phoenix. They do a great job of defending their third through, and it's the same thing, like block shots, try-saving tackles, you know, winning headers, slowing the play the ball down. Like, these are little details that help you defend in your own territory. And again, like the Warriors, they've got the right players in a good attacking system, which is what you're saying about the Phoenix. They do have that counter-attacking style, but they've got Rufer to get the ball into those stronger counter-attacking places. They've got Ben Old. It's interesting when you think, because like the Warriors, they've got, okay, it starts with Wade Egan around dummy half. He's the right man for that job. And then you've got passing forwards. They're the right man for that role in the shape. Then you've got Sean Johnson. He's the right man for the next level of the attacking shape. You go to the Phoenix, you've got Alex Rufer as the fulcrum, and then you've got someone like Ben Old who can receive the ball, make a run, and make another pass. And then you've got Zavada, Costa Barbarouses, who are the perfect blokes to be receiving the pass from Ben Old. These comparisons, they go pretty deep. I'm getting pretty hectic.
They do, eh? And I think we'll see more of that now that Zavada's back, because while he's not as quick, he's still a pretty mobile center forward, but he's really good at holding the ball up and doing some Chris Wood things. We've actually seen a lot of this from Chris Wood, because Nottingham Forest have been a lot more of a counter-attacking team. Well, they were trying to be a counter-attacking team under Steve Cooper. They're a better counter-attacking team under Nuno Espirito Santo, I'll say. And part of that is Chris Wood not being afraid to turn and dribble the ball himself, which he'd never do. Even if there's no one on him, he'd hold the ball up, lay it off before, because that's the kind of thing that that type of striker gets told to do. Zavada, his ability to hold the ball up and just as successfully as Chris Wood, admittedly a lower standard of play, but that's going to start, like, he holds the ball up, gives you time to get a couple other players forward. Ben Old goes gun and past him, lay it off, or picks the ball up in motion, and then he's away. Or Costa Barbarouses picks the ball up, running in behind kind of thing. That's how you can springboard into that stuff. And having Zavada back is going to help that a lot. They weren't that under. Their trickiness against Newcastle Jets was that they were a team that they'd lost to before and have had a few struggles against in recent seasons, it feels like, and they didn't have Tim Payne. Other than that, they had everyone available. I think with the women as well, I know Canberra are not very good, bottom of the table now, that Adelaide won on the weekend. But Canberra is not bottom because they don't score goals. I think they even have the two top goal scorers, old Vesna, what's her name, and Michelle Heyman. They're not a good team because they concede a lot of goals. The defense is their problem. They're losing games 3-2, 4-3, and things like this. But they're a good attacking team. So that was a thing that the Phoenix had to cope with in a game where they didn't have Michaela Foster, they didn't have Mackenzie Barry, they didn't have obviously Marissa Vandermeer, or even defensive-ish midfielder Grace Wisniewski. Well, Grace Wisniewski's box to box. She's a defensive midfielder and an attacking midfielder in one. But those two are out season-ending injuries. Barry and Foster weren't available. Their goalkeeper gets sent off with a quarter of the game still to go. Bring a couple debutants off the bench. One of their centre-backs was starting her first game for the club, having been a mid-season signing. Like, the amount of adversity they got to deal with at that point, and then to bring out one of their better defensive performances, that's huge. Like, that's the kind of thing you build off. And I do think moving forward, like, to fix that away form, that's probably where that probably is where the platform has to come from as well. That foundation is just being able to, you can't necessarily bank on clean sheets. We've seen the Phoenix Blokes the last 2 weeks. They've conceded 2 goals. Both of them were a shot off target that hits another attacker and deflects into the goal. Like, what are you going to do about that? Those things can happen, but generally that's only going to happen once a game. Like, you can sort of restrict a team to not scoring multiple times, then you're doing all right. And the Phoenix women, I think, are going to be better equipped to grind out some of those draws, turning those 2-1 defeats into 1-1 draws with a bit more of what we saw from them on the weekend, especially considering there were a couple of their best defenders to come back.